see a bunch of stuff? Yes, I'm ready.
It's red.
Thank you so much. Once again, this is message number 2 concerning what is the Lord's Supper. Last week we saw a few things. I will repeat a few things. I hope to be able to deliver a solid message to you without compromising. Intercede for me when there is a part when you don't follow too much. It does occur. Pray for me. Ask the Lord to set a good ointment on the tongue and so on, because sometimes I can have a tendency to misuse it. Okay, I'm not a perfect man. I have my frustrations, I have my fears also in my life and so on, but I am privileged to deliver that message to you. This is our message number 2 on communion. This is one of my favorite terms, as you know, or the breaking of the bread and so forth. Next week, on the very day, if we're not raptured before, in 1 week, Thursday will be the Jewish Passover, okay? Which is our Easter also. We'll discuss that at the proper time. And next week, we're going to take communion together for the first time in 7 months of existence. This church plant started on September the 4th, so we're 7 months old, very young, and we never partook because I was waiting for that moment. And more likely I was waiting to be given the opportunity to teach about it and so forth. Last week, what have we looked at together? We have looked at the meaning of an ordinance. Okay, we've looked at the meaning of it. What does it mean to have an ordinance? The meaning was, this is a rite, R-I-T-E, or ritual, or practice prescribed by Jesus to be performed by the church and an outward sign of saving truth of the Christian faith. We looked also at 3 things for an ordinance to qualify for something, an event or a rite to become an ordinance. It has to go through 3 things. It has to be found in the gospel instituted by the Messiah. Then it has to be seen in the book of Acts, which is a historical book. So we need to find it in the book of Acts. And then it needs to be also elaborated or more explained, if you want, in the epistles written by the apostles, without renaming everything. The names of them, we've seen 7, the Eucharist and all that kind of stuff. My favorite one is communion because it talks about sharing, koinonia. So this is something that we hold together in common. My second favorite, the breaking of the bread. It's just my favorite here. It's necessity, it's necessary. Simply because this is a rite instituted by Christ or a ritual, it's necessary to do it. It's only an issue of obedience. It doesn't save you. It does not unsave you. It does not make you more holy in a sense. It's an issue that needs to be obeyed. We know of 2 rites or 2 ordinances. My favorite word, it's water baptism and the Lord's Supper, in which we will be partaking next week. For purposes, it's a memorial. Okay, and I gave you the definition earlier than I was supposed to. It's based on Luke 22:19, in remembrance. In remembrance. There is no element that transferred into the real wine or blood of Jesus. It's only something that we do to remember, and the Jews are very good at that, because when they do Passover, they recount the totality of the book of Exodus as to be reminded of these things. So that's why they have an extraordinary memory, because they do it in remembrance, which is the proper element within. It announces, secondly, the basic facts of the gospel, the death of Christ and the return and so on. Based on First Communnion, number 3, 11:26, in our souls, it should create an anticipation of the second return of the Lord. Second return, as well as the rapture of the church, will come first and then the second return when he comes back physically. Something, according to my point of view, that the church at large has lost the tastiness in the mouth of it. We have become complacent about the fact that he's at the door coming back here. Some of them allegorize these things, amillennialism. There is no 1,000-year kingdom. So we have become, the word can be flippant about that. Partaking of this should create in our soul, wow, he's coming back until he comes, and so on. First Corinthians chapter 10, verse 17, the oneness. You have a loaf of bread here. We are in one body, Christ in you, me in Christ, and we are one. We partake of one bread. It's good for the universal church. It's one bread, one body of Christ. Of course, across the street, when they restart again, you're not part of that church, but you know what I mean, the oneness that we have in Christ. That was last week, in one sentence. Now we do message number 2. God bless you, God bless me. Let me talk about maybe 1, 2, and 3 points apart from the conclusion, and it will not be that long. Let's discuss a few things together concerning the frequency of the practice of the Lord's Supper. Come with me in the book of Acts, if you don't mind, if you can find rapidly your book of Acts, chapter 2, verse 46. At the beginning of the book of Acts, chapter 2, verse 46. You will see a few things, and let me say a word before I read the text, is the fact that in the early church, the practice sometimes was a bit different than what we do today. In the early church, in the book of Acts, we have the establishment, basically the birth of the church in Acts chapter 2 and so on. So when I'm sending you to Acts chapter 2:46, in that book, chapter 2 verse 46, it seems to be a daily thing. Come with me, 46. Day by day, that's what I want. Continuing with one mind in the temple, you see the temple was still standing, and breaking bread from house to house. They were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart. Just to show you, in that case, that time, daily. Come with me in Acts 20, Acts chapter 20. Come with me in Acts chapter 20, verse 7. On the first day of the week from the Jewish mindset is Saturday sundown, which is Sunday. When we were gathered together to break bread, Paul began talking to them and so on. The only phrase that I want in the text, in our context right now, weekly. On the first day of the week on Sunday, it becomes a weekly thing. So, to keep it simple, beloved, we have no specific command as to how often it should be done. You cannot find a verse of weekly. You cannot find a verse on weekly, yes, but it's a book of Acts. It's historical. So you cannot find a command either from Paul or Christ. You do it that many times. In First Corinthians 11:26, it simply says, listen closely, for as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. The clue, as far as the frequency, as often as you do it. Period. Could be weekly, could be monthly, could be tri-monthly, quarterly, or whatnot. So that's what we have. In Luke chapter 22, verse 19b, it says, this do in remembrance of me. So right now, I'm taking Corinthians 11:26, and I would like to mingle that with Luke 22:19, combining the two passages together. What's the main point? As often as you do this, do it in remembrance of the Messiah. So, to conclude properly without imposing, the frequency of the practice is left to each local congregation. The leadership decide. They decide. We do it weekly, we do it once a month, or we do it once a year, or we do it 4 times a year, and so on. It's up to each local congregation without imposing or without judging them and so on. However, when you look at Luke 22 and the context of Luke 22, the words of Christ are spoken in the context of the upper room discourse, and the words of Christ in Luke chapter 22, the totality of it, is in the context of Passover. Follow me. Because at the last Passover, when he did the sup and do many things, that's how and that's when he instituted the Lord's Supper. So the minimal norm for a church should be once a year. That's minimal. That's the minimum norm. So the minimum for its practice should be a once a year thing. My take on that, once a year, I find it quite distant type of thing to explain and to enjoy that ceremony. I would do it personally at the DIBC 3 to 4 times a year, but to make a good display and a good message pertaining to the act. There is danger for those who go weekly and monthly. Unless they are very mature, there is a danger. We know of some brethren movement. They are faithful to do it on a weekly basis. Most of the churches, they go on a once a month basis. The advice and the warning for these things is to be careful not to be caught up in a ritual. In the tick mark issue, oh, this week I've been in church, so you tick this one off. Oh, by the way, I took the bread this month, tick mark. It's not the attitude that God wants us to have with these things. And we will see it has to have a great measure of reverence in it. So the danger, it's a little bit like the sacrificial system of the Mosaic law. All the sacrifice twice a day by the holy priest and so on, under the old dispensation of the Mosaic law. In the book of Malachi, they became plain sick of it. Oh, another sacrifice? Thank you. Give me the money first, and then I'll keep the fat of the offering and go back home and thank you so much. And don't talk to me too long, I don't have time to waste. They fell into ritualism, and I think that there is a good lesson for us to know that. Partake weekly if you want. I don't really, it's not my problem. My problem, it's not to confess what needs to be confessed, which we will see at the end of the message, and to do it irreverently, and just for the sake of doing it and being there for communion. And not to be man-centered accomplishment, like the tick mark. Oh, I've been there, we partake of communion, that was good. I did it, because it's what's required of me, I did it. If you go with that kind of attitude, beloved, it's better to abstain. We dealt with the frequency. What's the way or method? What is the way now or method of practicing? We need to respect 4 things. How do we do it? It's the simple way. What's the way or the manner or the method of practice of what, François? The Lord's Supper. 4 things that I would like to share with you. Number 1, the setting. It should happen when the local church congregates together or assemble together. It's not proper to do it one-on-one in private. This is something that should be done as a body, a plurality of persons. It should happen when the local church congregates or assemble together. François, do you have scriptures? Definitely. Come with me, you are already there. Acts 20, verse 7. Now I would like to give you the emphasis on a different word, of course. On the first day of the week, when we were gathered together. When we were gathered together, not one-on-one isolated, Paul began to talk to them. What I wanted, when we were gathered together, it's the body of believer. Come with me in First Corinthians 11, verse 18. First Corinthians chapter 11, verse 18. Come with me. For in the first place, when you come together as a church. What is the church? It's the body of the Messiah. And it says, when you come together as a church. I'm going to stop right there. Scroll down to verse 20. Therefore, when you meet together, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper, but forget the last sentence. I want 28. Therefore, when you meet together. Scroll down to verse 33 and 34. So then, my brethren, when you come together to eat, wait for one another. If anyone is thirsty, let him eat at home, that you will not come together for judgment. The remaining matters I will arrange when I come. So, the setting, it's meant to be partaken, like if we would partake right now, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 person, 11 with me, we partake as a group. I'm not saying that it's completely off if you are asked to go to hospital, a person that is dying. Roman Catholicism do it often. The priests go and they do communion because they believe in the saving aspect of it. I'm not saying that this cannot be done. You go with an elder, a deacon, you go to minister to a lady that says, can I partake of the bread before I go home, and so on. This is not what I'm saying here. I'm just saying that this is something that is meant for the body of the Messiah, those who gather together as believers, as I believe you are. I don't have the gospel included in the message. That's how we do it. Number 2, the elements. 2 elements that we need. The bread and the wine. This is where I need to watch my tongue, to ask Sylvie and all of you to keep me accountable. I'm not going to make a discourse of it. We need 2 elements to partake in the bread. That's the bread, and it has to be unleavened bread to meet the requirements. The liquid is fermented wine, red wine. The only time that they were allowed white wine, it was with the blood libel, when the Jews were accused to kill the Christians and so on, but we're not in that period of time. So the unleavened bread is necessary, and God does not even allow the symbol of sin to be present. Okay? Some people will say, oh, it's just symbolism, it's not important. This is the most insignificant argument that I never heard in my life. That's why I have the menorah. Do you know where we find the scriptures about the menorah? Brother, would you do that to me? Would you do that? Because you can read. Would you go to Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 and 2? I'm going to ask Jan to read the passage of scripture. Jan, if you don't mind standing, just read verses 1 and 2.
Okay, King James Version.
That's fine.
And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots.
Look at my fingers now while he reads. Don't bother your passage. We have a reader. Look at my finger.
And a branch shall grow out of his roots, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord.
That's why you have the menorah. And the menorah is a symbol of the 7 spirits of God. Why did Moses did not do 8, 11, 3? It's 7. And this is a symbol of the 7 spirits of God, completeness. This will rest on Christ based on Isaiah, what he read, the root of Jesse. It's a symbol, beloved online. It's a symbol. Why not 10? It looks better. These are symbols, and they have to be proper. Unleavened bread and red wine.
What was that verse again? Isaiah what?
Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 and 2 that he read. That's the symbol of that's the oldest symbol of Israel, by the way. The flag that you know will be displayed next week. This is the oldest symbol. My lovely wife, she's a Jew, and on our passport, that's what she has. That's the 7th Spirit of the Lord. And it's a symbol. So even God does not even allow the symbol of sin to be present. The unleavened bread is a symbol of Yeshua's sinlessness. His body was not leavened. So for any Jews, leaven is a symbol of sin. This is easy to find in the scriptures. It's all over the place. A little leaven leavened the whole lump. It's in the book of Corinthians and so on. So what's the symbol here to have a piece of unleavened bread? Because the God-man was completely sinless, meaning an unleavened body. What are we doing? Continue to partake with leavened bread. I'm just asking the question. The wine here, it's a red liquid, so it's red wine. That's what Christ used at Passover. Non-alcoholic wine may be provided for those who don't feel free to partake in the alcohol in the wine. But the weaker brother, those who don't want to partake, are weaker brother that have not reached the maturity to be able, must not allow to decide the rules for the body as a whole. So the norm cannot be dependent on those who are not capable of partaking. When I say weak, it's not a negative thing that I say. It's those that abstain for valid reason and so on and so forth. They cannot set the norm for the rest of the body that is more mature, is the way. Because you have levels of spirituality in it. So that's why people partake in grape juice of the time to accommodate the minority, but the proper way to do it is with the wine. So the best way maybe to accommodate, it's with a non-alcoholic wine, but it has to be red, and remember that the minority cannot decide for the majority of the body. And we have many examples in the scriptures where the majority is wrong. Just thinking about the 12 spies. He came back and only 2 were right, and the rest was not right. But they sided with the majority. We see that in the course of history of mankind, believers or not. Everybody follows the majority right now. But everybody's in depression because we segregate together right now. The order of the service, number 3. What did Jesus do? You know. First the bread, then the wine. That's all I have to say. The participants, number 4. The participants should partake of both, the bread and the wine. Here, we will partake of both, as you do in your church also. I say this because the studies that I've made, for centuries, Roman Catholicism, only the priests could partake of the wine, so that the wine would not be spilled. The laity, the common people, were only partaking of the bread, but the clergy were partaking of the wine only. I think they rectify this. That's why I say that. Third aspect of the message tonight, the prerequisite. We have 2 major prerequisites to be able to partake. One is debatable. Are you with me? Am I losing you? Is it boring?
No.
Okay? Don't need to agree with everything. This is my conclusion here. The prerequisites. We have 2 major prerequisites. One is questionable. And the prerequisites that must be met before we partake next week. Okay? Salvation is one of them. We'll discuss that. Water baptism, the second one. Self-examination. Let's take them one by one. Salvation is the one prerequisite. It should be never from a pastor, from a servant, from a priest. It should never be knowingly be served to an unbeliever. Knowingly. I don't see the soul of the people. But knowingly should not be served to an unbeliever. This is the table of the Lord. This is the Eucharist, this is the communion, and we have nothing to do with the kingdom of darkness. So this is for believers only. The second one is the one that is questionable. Water baptism. In the early church, baptism from water, baptism with water or in the water, was following salvation right away. The Ethiopian eunuch on his chariot, he shared the gospel. Philip shared the gospel with the man, saw a body of water. Can I be baptized? Get up the chariot, was baptized, and so on and so forth. Because at that time, in the first century, people understood what was baptism all about. But we, as the church, we read it completely. So before we baptize people, we're going to need to do classes on baptism for what it does do and what it does not do and what it means. And it will be offered at the DIBC. So that's why here it could be questionable. Today there is so much confusion. There is a mess that has been done not by God, by us. And it's wise to do classes on baptism before getting baptized. So water baptism is questionable. Personally, I would not keep a person that has a genuine faith in Christ, who is still questioning baptism, why and how it should be done from partaking of the bread. So for me, this is a questionable event. Number 2, unquestionable, and this is where I struggle with churches today. Self-examination. Going back to the first requisite, it's important. First of all, what was the first requisite, please? Salvation. Believers is the same thing. Go back to the first prerequisite, believers only. We need to know another important issue here, that of self-examination. That's the point of First Communnion chapter 11. You come with me right now, 27 to 28, which it was read at the beginning. Therefore, whoever eats of the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. But a man also, needless to tell you that it does involve the two sexes, but a man must examine himself, and in so doing he is to eat of the bread and drink of the cup. And we're talking about here, I don't need to be negative, I don't mean to be severe, but we're talking about the rigorous. Do I say properly? Rigorous?
Yes.
Hard. A tough self-examination. And I don't mean to be rude, because it's the beauty of it. So what does it entail? One should be, I cannot make eye contact right now. One should confess all his known sins. Confess your known sins, because you cannot confess what you know. If you omit the stuff and you were not even conscious because you were thinking and you pass it and you never noticed it, it's unknown. But we need to confess what is known. My shortcoming, my usage of the tongue, my sexual immorality outside the bonds of marriage, my problem of gossiping, my problem of anger, name it. One should confess all his known sin. And secondly, the question should be, am I walking an orderly spiritual life? Examine your walk. Francois, are you walking worthy? I'm not talking about the perfect walk, because if you wait to have a perfect walk, forget about partaking in communion. Ever. Only the French Canadian are perfect. I hear no amen?
I'm not sure.
You're right. You're right. Allow me a joke. It loosen up a little bit. Me and you. The thing is, make an analysis of your walk before you partake. Do I thirdly discern, and appreciate that the unleavened bread and the wine represent God's atonement accomplished for me on the cross? Do I look at it and say, wow, forget about the amount of alcohol here. The blood of Christ shed on the cross for the New Testament. He was completely guiltless. He was scourged and pierced for my transgression, and I can partake in it. That's the attitude that has been lost among the churches. We partake because we have to, and it looks great. And if you walk the aisle like in major congregation, and there is, when you walk the aisle and you pretend to be godly a little bit, and just like this, and you walk and it's just a little smile, and you don't talk, of course. But if there is a lady sitting at the front row or middle row or back row with a skirt that is a little bit too short, do you think that me being a man, sometimes I completely avoid the look? And I go partake. A man is a man. So I have perhaps that weaknesses, but what does he teach us? Why do we need elderly ladies and young ladies in church that will tell and approach in a very loving way privately the younger lady or the medium-aged lady saying, it's a bit short, beloved. Not in public. So that we may get sanctified because men like it. If you don't, you have a problem. I'm talking to the men right now. Like it? Oh, no, you like it. That's confession. Communion, do I discern accomplished for me on the cross? Communion is sacred, deeply significant. And it should be observed with unfailing reverence. So that's why the more you will limit it to 3 times a year, the more you will appreciate it, with a sermon pertaining to it, with the proper elements and so on. Let's talk about the danger of partaking unworthily. First Corinthians 11, 29, 30, and 31, and I will conclude with this. For he who eats and drinks judgment to himself, if he does not judge the body rightly. For this reason, many among you are weak and sick, and a number sleep. But if we judge ourselves rightly, we will not be judged. But when we are judged, we are disciplined by the Lord so that we will not be condemned along with the world. It has to be partaken reverently. Here I'm talking about the danger of partaking unworthily. God will discipline those who treat the Lord's Supper lightly. Your salvation can never, ever, never, ever be touched. It's given to you, it's under His seal, it's under His covenants, you're bound to heaven. But God can discipline in this life below. I, in two ways, misjudge the body, Christ Himself and the church, as being one, and a lack of rigorous self-examination. So we need to be aware of these things. Misjudging the body when we partake unworthily. The body is Christ, but we are one in Him. So it's both Christ and His church, basically. And a lack of rigorous self-examination here may lead to the 4 physical dangers that I will name right now. Sorry for the confusion or the bumpiness here. There is 4 physical dangers involved. Number 1, chastisement. We call it godly discipline. And I repeat, nothing to do with your salvation. Because God is a loving Father and He likes to discipline His children. As much as I was disciplined when I was young. Don't be afraid. Like Roman Catholicism in the past instilled in me. For years I was plagued with a bad fear of God, picturing God with a big hammer, and as soon as I was whistling around, I was nailed. I would have had many nails through me because I messed around quite a bit. And slowly, in my sanctification, I managed to get rid of that false fear. But He's a God that can discipline. Weakness, number 2. Sickness, number 3. And physical death is those who fall asleep. It's kind of weird. Because I have a privilege, I had past tense privilege, because as a Bible expositor, I had the opportunity to travel in many, many churches, small and big. Mainly small. Titus Island, Cow Lake, and all that kind of stuff. In large as well. New Life, I spoke quite often there, and in bigger church in Victoria and so forth. And I listened to the prayer requests. And there is so much prayer going out for the people that are weak. It's perfect. There is so many people that are prayed upon for sickness all the time, specifically in the winter time. And those who died. But do you realize for a quick moment with me that unworthy partaking in this may help out to some to be weak? The weakness here talked about is physical weakness. And the sickness talked about here, it's physical sickness. And the death here doesn't talk about spiritual death. It talks about physical death. So as ministers, which I'm shaky right now, I don't want to be a cause for you of weakness, sicknesses, and death. If you get the COVID virus, the first thing that we pretend to do right now, we don't want to go out because we don't want to be the cause of passing on. It's hiding behind the truth. It's not sincere. How come you care so much now? How come we didn't care last October when it was just a flu season? That takes more people away than the COVID. But if I am a pastor and I partake with leavened bread that high and everything is in disorder and I don't encourage you to self-examination, I'm passing you the COVID-19. What's caring for the flock? How do we care for the flock? All of it are meant to bring us back from the wrong path so that we will not be condemned with the world. That's why the self-examination, François, come back on track, then partake. Weekly, if your pastor does it weekly. But I know of churches that partake weekly and standing on forgiveness. It's enough to die, physically. And the people are weak in the churches, physically, because of an unworthy, no reverence, respect for these things. I conclude with kindness. It's written in my notes. Don't tell me that I don't remind myself. It says with kindness. It's not written to you. I wrote it to myself. All my sermons are handwritten. I'm so stingy that it's It's all outlines that I don't want anymore, and I write my sermons on all of them. It's a ritual for me. I will never take a new page. It's all used paper. It was not in my note.
It's on the
You know,
tape.
we all have our stuff. All my sermons are handwriting, never typed. And I wrote here with kindness, Francois. The message here, it's not about what I think about the matter. It's not about what I think about the matter, not at all. It's like Bible study in small group. What does the passage say to you? No thanks. It's not what does the passage say to you. It's what the author within the recipient sent the letter, and what does it mean for that time, and how can it apply to you now? That's the question. It's not about what I have been brought up with. Forget it. It's not about what the majority think. I don't mind. Plainly. It's not about what the majority do. And I know what the majority do. Leavened bread. It's not about what denomination do. It's not about what church leaders think of it. Because you might be willing to change it, and it's not going to happen because there is too much pride. They will not confess something that they have been doing wrong for the last 100 years. But it's about what Christ taught in His Word. It's about going back to obedience. It's about acknowledging our wrongdoings, and we cannot be without. It's about saying, yeah, having reflected on it, we're not quite on top with some matter on the table. Let's move it. So it's not about, it's about acknowledging our wrongdoings, and we cannot be without, otherwise we would claim perfectness. It's not about asking, it is about, it's no longer not. First one it was, but it's about what Christ taught. And it's about going back to obedience. It is about acknowledging our wrongdoings. It's about asking for forgiveness to God. If we have been wrong in doing it, you just ask for forgiveness. You don't need to sweat it for 3 years. It's about raising the reverence, the quality of our worship to Him. Our sinless, unleavened God-man who shed His blood for our redemption. Everybody, if I ask you, Stephanie, do you have the desire to offer Him in your life a greater worship? I know the answer to that, dear you. You will probably say yes to it. And you too. Start when you ought to start. It's to raise to a higher standard. Sometimes we watch it, oh la la la, and we have a little bit of goosebumps, you know. And my favorite is Comme d'Enfant. I can play Comme d'Enfant every Thursday. Because I like, prone to wonder, I feel it. Goosebumps. Are we going to go back to goosebumps with this? I leave this one with you. It's about raising the reverence of our worship to Him. Our sinless, unleavened God-man who shed His blood for our redemption. These things here at the IBC, and I don't mean to change the world. This is important. Baptism is also important. And I don't mean to burden you. I want to be a small cluster of people that are striving to be biblical, to raise to a higher degree within our walk of sanctification with Him, progressive sanctification, becoming more and more into the image of the Messiah daily, and to offer together a greater worship. I'm done. Push the button. Just the one on top.